these are real life examples. People I've coached. Okay? So Vivas, first person, Chadian PhD in political science, who speaks French and Arabic, does not speak English much or very little, okay? And has settled in Edmonton. Roger is a Chinese textile engineer who is studying for an MBA at Haskell, and he wants to go into the retail industry. Mohammed is a mechanical engineer from Pakistan who was making the casing of missiles. And Basim is a mechanical engineer. He has a PhD from the UK. He's Iraqi. He was in Iraq for a number of years. Couldn't do research, but he could teach mechanical engineering, at least during that period of time. Then he fell out with the government. He had to leave overnight. He ended up in Libya, where he was working in a company that was assembling TV. And he came to Canada eventually, and he hasn't worked in his field for 15 years. So, what problems do these people face? And how would you help them as counselors? So, Vivas. What's his problem? Language. And I'm sure you've seen people like that, because fundamentally the question is, can they learn the language fast enough that their skill won't be obsolete by the time they've learned the language? Because the challenge is, what level of language fluency do you need to discuss political science?
Very high.
Very high.
Very high. Okay, if you think of the Canadian language benchmark, scale of like 12-point scale, you got to be at 12. Okay, like anything short of that, it's not going to work. So, and if he starts, let's say he starts at like 2 or 3, well, how long is it going to take him to get to that? Yeah. So in essence, for many people, I've seen a number of clients like that. They end up in a race. They need to improve their language skills before their technical skills become obsolete. In the case of this guy, because he has to get to such a high level, the odds of him being able to win that race are essentially 0.
So what about relocation to Quebec?
I mean, Vivas, what I told him is, look, you got to look for a job in Quebec or Ottawa.
Yep.
Be ready to pack your bag. I'm not saying move. I'm saying be ready to pack your bag. Look for a job from here and make it very clear you're going to move assuming you get a job there. Okay? Because here it's going to be really, really difficult. I mean, like if you don't speak English in Alberta, you pretty much, I mean, the odds of you getting a job are really low. Okay? So yeah, this is somebody, in his case, I told him, be ready to move. Look for a job in Quebec City, maybe New Brunswick and Quebec. And Ottawa, and that's it. Okay? Roger's so what's the challenge for Roger? Yeah, textile engineering, zip. Okay, there is no textile engineering in Canada. So that one is already a good challenge. What's the other challenge? Exactly what you were asking. Why do you want to get into the retail industry? Okay? So the reason Roger wanted to get into the retail industry and thought it would work is that he really understands the suppliers of the Bay and all the companies like that. Because all the companies he was working with in China were making the clothes for all these department stores. But what's the challenge? What makes or breaks a retail company?
Sales.
Yeah, and so how do you get sales? You need to understand the customer, not the suppliers. So him understanding the suppliers will not make a huge difference to the organization. He needs to understand the customers, not the suppliers. Okay? And I mean, so with Roger, I remember demonstrating to him that he did not understand customers at all or very little by asking him about, now, I've been to China, so that makes a difference there. If you go to China, you will see that when they have advertising, like for example in the subway, the colors they use are pastel colors. In other words, the kind of colors we would use for Easter. But that's the only time of year we use these colors. The rest of the time, it's not pastel colors. But in China, they use that all the time. So what does it mean? Well, your understanding of the end user is probably very limited. And for you to succeed in retail, if you don't understand consumers, you probably won't go anywhere. So in real life, Roger realized that going in the retail industry was probably not a good idea. Now, one thing, what Roger had done, yes, he was in the textile industry, but fundamentally his strength, his fundamental skill was improving processes. Now, as an engineer, he was improving production processes. Because he was doing an MBA, he kind of combined the MBA with improving processes, and he got a job to improve business processes. So he got a job at CIBC, actually, in real life. Then actually Rogers moved on to be the chief technical officer of the Toronto Star. And then after that, he moved to China to become the CEO of a company. That was his ultimate goal. He wanted to be CEO. Yeah. Mohamed, what is the challenge for Mohamed?
The industry, okay.
Yeah, I mean, like, we don't build a lot of missiles in Canada. And whatever missile building we have will require security clearance, which he's not going to get. So the odds of him working in his industry are exactly zero. What can he do?
Anything involving kind of tubes?
Yes.
Pipelines or...
Exactly. So, like, I mean, in the case of Mohamed, like, I remember asking him, well, what did you do concretely? Like, you know, how do you make the casing? So what he said is, so the way you make casing of missiles, essentially you take a flat piece of steel. And we're talking like 2-inch thick, okay? We're not talking aluminum foil. Okay? It's like, it's thick, like a flat piece of steel like this. You put it between rollers and warm, like you heat the rollers so that the steel becomes hot and it's more kind of flexible. Yeah, thank you. And you roll it into a cylinder and you weld it. And I remember, like, so the way I remember, I had no idea, like, what do you do with this kind of technology? So I talked to my dad. My dad is, he's retired, but he was a, what do you call that? He was in the nuclear industry, quality assurance. This is an important point. As counselors, I will really encourage you to find people who have this kind of specialization, which cuts across industries. Because people like that will know what's happening in different industries. Most people only know what's going on in their industry. But people who are, for example, quality assurance, health and safety, environment, corporate governance, things like that, which cut across industries, some of them will be aware of what's going on in several industries. And so they can be a great source of information. In the case of Mohamed, so I talked to my dad. I asked him, like, you know, what do you do with that? Like, what can this guy do fundamentally? And he told me exactly what Eric said. Like, yeah, this is the same technology that is used to make pipelines, tank cars, tank trucks, high pressure vessels. And so Mohamed became his expertise in particular was making sure that the welding is done well. So he became a quality assurance engineer in one of the pipeline companies. Basim.
It's irrelevant and about.
So the challenge, yeah, his expertise is obsolete.
Yeah.
Okay, he hasn't worked in his field in a long time. He will not get a license. It's going to be very, very, very difficult. So Basim was one of the people I really enjoyed working with, because I think Basim did the best labor market study I've ever seen. So Basim's expertise, his PhD, was on a technology called hydroforming. So probably haven't heard of it. The idea is you take a pipe, like a metal pipe, and you put it inside a cavity. You pump a fluid inside the pipe at very high pressure. The pipe expands and takes the shape of the cavity. So you can make an exhaust pipe for a car in one shot. Whereas normally you got to make several parts, you weld them together and so on. So it's technique that enables you to save money in some cases. Basim, as I said, did the best labor market study I've ever seen. He found out that in Canada there are exactly 7 people who work on hydroforming, like doing research on that topic. He talked to all 7 of them. He had fantastic soft skills. Okay? He talked to all 7 of them and realized there is absolutely no future in hydroforming, even if my PhD was relevant. So he decided to become a math tutor. He started his own tutoring company, like tutoring mathematics at the high school level. Okay? Everybody with me on these cases? Okay, and one important element is helping the person understand the nature of the challenge they face. So how do you do that? Well, a big one is the labor market study. Go look for job postings. Can you find a job posting that does not require English? That's going to be a challenge. What makes or breaks the retail industry? Yeah. So this, labor market studies, in my experience, really help a lot calibrate candidates. Because if you can't find any job posting like that, well, the odds are good that you'll have to rethink your approach. Making strategic decision. One important decision is always about, do I look for a job where I am, or do I need to prepare myself at least to move, if not move? And one big challenge is this. In many of the home countries of immigrants, where are the jobs? In the big cities, absolutely. In particular, in the capital.
Yeah.
That's where the jobs are. That is not the way Canada operates. There's many situations. So for example, if you think of oil and gas, oil and gas is primarily in Alberta. What are the big cities in Canada? Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver. And none of them is in Alberta. Okay. I made that mistake. Okay. My PhD is in chemical engineering. What I studied is distillation. The industrial sector that employs the largest number of distillation engineers is the oil and gas industry. So where should I have looked for a job when I came to Canada? Here. Okay? But that's not the way I tackled the problem. The way I tackled the problem fundamentally was this. I projected onto Canada the economic structure of my home country. So in France, there's Paris and the rest. Okay? If you want to have a career in France, you have to go to Paris. In French, we say Paris et le désert français. That translates into Paris and the French desert. So in other words, Paris or bust. Okay? That's kind of the idea. So when I came to Canada, I figured I have to go to the Canadian equivalent of Paris. I knew it's not Ottawa, because Ottawa is not the economic equivalent, it's the political equivalent. So I looked for a job in Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver. Do you know what percentage of immigrants land in Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver combined? Yeah, it's close to 3/4, somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4. Okay? So I'm not the only one who made that mistake, let's put it this way. Okay? And so I couldn't get a job that makes use of my distillation knowledge. I got a job at the PhD level, at Procter level, but I couldn't get a job that made use of my distillation knowledge because I was looking in the wrong place. And it took me about 8 or 9 years to realize that there were only 4 organizations in Canada that were interested in my distillation knowledge, 3 in Calgary, 1 in Edmonton. That was it. Okay, so another one, food processing. Well, where is food processing done? Rural areas. One example I can give you of this one, I remember this guy, he was from Iran, and he was an engineer. His expertise was designing plants that process milk into dairy product. So, you know, like you make yogurt, cheese, and butter and all that good stuff. So he landed at Toronto. Well, what happens? There's not a lot of milk processing plants in Toronto. Okay? So he ended up getting a job in a city, well, town, I should say, called Minto, Manitoba. You probably have never heard of it. I had never heard of it either until this guy went there. It's Minto, Manitoba is about 1 hour southeast of Brandon, Manitoba. So we're talking middle of nowhere kind of thing. Okay? It's like there's maybe 500 people in that town. Okay? But in that town, there is a guy who has a herd of goats. He has 1,000 goats, and he wanted to turn the milk of his goats into cheese. So mining, another one, like, you know, where's mining done? Well, BC, Ontario, Quebec. Yeah, there is oil sand mining, but that's a very different kind of mining. Yeah. Unless you do uranium mining or potash, then it's Saskatchewan. Okay, so this is the idea, like what kind of thing, and mining is not, like in Canada, mining is a specialized thing. What I mean by that, if you mine potash, it's not the same as mining gold. Because the way you're going to structure the plant, if you're mining something that's very valuable like gold or diamonds, will be quite different because you have to take a whole pile of measures to prevent people stealing the product. Whereas potash, go for it. You can steal as much potash as you want. Okay? Like nobody cares. Because we're selling it by the 1,000 tons. Okay? One big one, for example, medical people in healthcare professions. The odds of an immigrant finding a job in their profession, if they're in healthcare, are way higher if they're willing to go to remote areas. I mean, it's very, very obvious. Because what happens? Well, there's no competition. Whereas if you want to go to a big city, then you are competing with all Canadian graduates. So it's really striking. I remember, like, in Toronto, there's like for pharmacists, there's a bridging program at the University of Toronto run by the Faculty of Pharmacy of the university in collaboration with the Ontario College of Pharmacists. I remember the guy who represented Loblaws, and he wanted, he came every year to hire pharmacists from that program. Most of these pharmacists came either from the Philippines or Egypt. Those were the two big countries. And he would tell them, look, if you're looking for a job in Ottawa or Toronto, forget it. Don't come see me. But anywhere else, I have options. I mean, that was really the message. So understanding where the need is, it's a market. The labor market is a market, supply and demand. So where is the demand? Another one is, so if you remember the slide with technical skills versus soft skills, remember immigrants are in the top left corner, and lines of equal value are diagonal. So let's say, we're going to oversimplify, but let's say below this line, you don't get a job. Above the line, you get a job. So this is the minimum level of value you need to bring to the organization to get a job. What happens in a boom period? What happens in a recession? How does that line change? So in a boom, it goes down. In a recession, it goes up. The minimum level of value you need to bring to get a job in a recession is higher. On the other hand, in a boom, it's much easier to find a job. So what does that mean? It is important for immigrants to understand which sectors are booming. I find it's at the sector level as opposed to the location, because it tends to be, the sector is really the big driver. Remember when we talked about profession and sector? It's really understanding which sectors. And I can tell you, for me, it's very, very apparent because my work is really related to that. Fundamentally, when I work with corporations, it's corporations that are in a booming sector. Because if a sector is booming in Canada, very quickly it runs out of traditional candidates. And what's the reaction? Immigrants. And 6 months later, they realize, oh my God, how do we manage people like that? And then I get a phone call. And the thing is, I work with many organizations in the same sector at the same time, while that sector is booming. Then the boom ends, and I don't talk to anybody for a while. And so in essence, I ride these boom waves. So I started in 1998. Which wave do you think was I ended up riding at that point? Which sector was booming in 1998? Can anybody remember?
Wasn't it the tech sector?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Y2K.
Yeah.
Y2K meant that the IT sector was booming. And I've seen people like Chinese programmers, for example, who could speak English really like minimal English, but they landed at the right time, the right place. And they knew the right programming languages. They could program in whatever was popular, COBOL, C++, Java, whatever. And they would get a job. And the company would tell them, you don't speak English, it's okay. We'll pair you up with somebody who speaks your first language. That person will translate the instructions for you, go for it. Okay? Now, guess what happened in 2001? The dot-com bubble burst, okay? The IT sector tanked. And in essence, the line in a matter of 6 months, moved like significantly. So if that programmer who got a job in 1998 without speaking English had not learned English by 2001, what happened? Gone. Okay? Companies were bending over backwards for employees at that point. Here, it's like, be happy you have a job. Okay? And after that, the next wave was Sarbanes-Oxley. So if you're in accounting, you know exactly what I mean by that. If you're not in accounting, you may have never heard of it. Sarbanes-Oxley was to the accounting world what Y2K was to the IT world. Sarbanes-Oxley was a reaction to the WorldCom and Enron debacle, meaning like the accounting firm was found to have...
Arthur Anderson.
Yeah, Arthur Anderson was found to have not done things properly, let's put it this way. Like fraud was definitely the problem. Whether the firm was involved, that's a different question. But anyway, the reaction of the American Congress was to pass an act that was a bipartisan act. And it gives you an idea of how important it was to them. So there was one Republican, one Democrat. I don't remember whether Sarbanes was the Republican or the Democrat. But anyway, Sarbanes and Oxley were the two people who wrote the act. And Sarbanes-Oxley was kind of the way I like to describe it to non-accountants is the equivalent of ISO 9000 for accounting. What I mean by that is you had a whole pile of new measures you had to put in place to make sure that the books were properly representing what was going on inside the organization. One of the big ones was, if the books are found to be there's fraud, then the CEO goes to jail. And that was a big motivator for many large organizations. And Y2K created millions of billable hours for accounting firms like PwC, Ernst & Young, KPMG, and Deloitte. Because all organizations had to implement it at the same time. Any organization that was traded on the American Stock Exchange had to go through it. So accounting firms brought people from all over the world, and I worked with several of them to help people integrate into the workplace in Canada. Then after that, the next wave was IFRS. It was still in accounting. It was International Financial Reporting Standards. Thank you. Yeah, I keep forgetting. So that was the next wave. Okay. Then after that, it collapsed. Like I did a lot less work with accounting firms when IFRS was implemented. The next wave was gold mining. Gold shot up to $1,800 an ounce. And at that point, gold mining companies had all kinds of programs for their employees. And then gold tanked to $1,200, and it's like all this disappeared. The next wave was oil. Oil shot up to, past $60 a barrel. Oil sands became profitable, and suddenly there was tons of work for immigrants and for myself in Calgary and throughout Alberta. The next wave is actually colleges and universities. So I don't know if you've experienced it, like many colleges and universities in Canada are experiencing a boom in the number of applicants, first of all, and most importantly in the quality of applicants. Do you know where that's coming from?
Student visas.
International students.
Yeah, international students, absolutely. It's like,
Also the workforce too.
yeah, and fundamentally it's Trump. Yeah. I mean, I don't know what you think of this guy. I have a very negative opinion of him, but that's a personal issue. But the one thing I can say, Trump has done something absolutely fantastic for Canada. He has damaged, if not destroyed, the image of the United States as the country of destination to study or to immigrate. 10 years ago, if you were in China, Brazil, or Poland and you wanted to go to overseas to study, where would you go? The US was the obvious destination. Today, it's no longer the top one. Canada is now at the top. Boris Johnson, and well, the whole Brexit thing has also killed the UK as a destination. So we have had, Canadian colleges and universities have benefited tremendously from both, because now there's a boom in the number of applicants and in the quality of applicants. That's the biggest one. Because when you do research, when you do like starting companies, it's not the average that counts. It's the one that will create the next Amazon. Okay? And hopefully that person will be in Canada instead of being in the US. I think it will have a huge impact on Canada in 10 years. I mean, we won't see it overnight, okay? But it will make a world of difference over time. Questions or comments on this one? Oh, there's one sector that also seems to be booming, but we'll see how much of a boom it will be. It's marijuana,
Yeah.
cannabis,
Yeah.
okay? I think in Medicine Hat, for example, that is starting to be the industry of the town, okay, or it will be very soon. Okay. So yes, Eric, go ahead.
I have a story that kind of ties this together with your pastel colors
Sure.
and stuff. Do I
Yeah,
get my-
yes, please, so that we can
So,
record it for the. Yeah.
My wife is an immigrant, as you know.
Yeah.
She's Japanese, and we were living in Japan in 2006 and came to visit Calgary for a family visit. And during that time, saw the boom that was happening in Calgary and the fact that if you had a pulse, you could get a job.
Yes.
So the line of equal value was very low.
Oh yes.
We decided to move to Canada at that time. One good thing was that my wife then decided to get a university degree in the next couple of years. We arrived here in 2008. And I got a job just before, like probably a week before the housing market in the States crashed. My wife did not. And my wife was a marketer. And when you talked of the pastel colors, it made me think of my wife because, you know, she understood the Japanese market for cosmetics very, very well. And she thought that she would get a job in Calgary in marketing. And very quickly discovered that A, not being a native English speaker, and B, not understanding Canadian culture, that marketing was not going to happen.
Yes.
So she did some labor market research, discovered that the top, I think you may have talked about it already, the top industries for immigrants being engineering, medicine, IT, or accounting,
Yeah.
and decided impossible, 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 possible, and that's when she became an accountant, and has done prerequisites and is now in the CPA program. And actually, because of her, I found my job at CPA because she asked me when I was unemployed to research CPA. But yeah, it kind of like ties us down because the line of equal value was very, very low when we visited in 2006. When she started job searching in 2008, it had shot up.
Yes.
And then she had to go through that whole process of figuring out, you know, where are the opportunities going to be.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that was, well, I mean, in 2006, 2007, I will always remember visiting like Edmonton in 2007, late 2007. And so if you've ever been to Edmonton, like, you know, at the entrance of the airport, there's 2 gas stations.
Yeah.
And at the time, those gas stations had signs that said, gas pump attendant wanted, $700 signing bonus. Yeah. I mean, I remember going to the West Edmonton Mall and all the stores were advertising their jobs. They were not advertising their specials. Nobody cared about specials at that point. Everybody was advertising their jobs. I mean, it was really, but so at that point, yeah, as you said, Eric, if you had a pulse, you got a job. The problem was if you didn't have good soft skills, when the boss came, you would very likely lose that job. And this isn't, like, we go back to that Canadian experience. I remember working with many engineers who arrived when the Alberta was booming, got a job. Their soft skills were not good by Canadian standards. They didn't improve them during that period of time. 2 years later, it busted. They lost their job. And they were lacking Canadian experience, even though they had worked in Canada. Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Another comment.
Yes, absolutely.
Especially with post-secondary. So yes, seeing the recession come up in Calgary has forced people to think about their education, but also comes into play with all the applicants with bachelors, lucky enough to have them here. Then the next step is masters.
Yes.
So changing that up and also adapting to the students coming in, because most people can't just quit their job if they're lucky enough to have one to go and do a master's for 2 years, right? So a lot of the educational institutes that are booming are those ones that are more flexible and took the proactive approach instead of,
This is the program.
Yeah. So
Yes.
masters, next thing,
Yeah.
on and on and on. So.